Hey everyone, this is Bill Kenney, CEO of Focus Lab, a global B2B brand agency. I'm back with another episode of the Debrief today. This is a special episode. I'll tell you why in a second. But first, just as a reminder, this series is all about sitting down with past Focus Lab and OD rebrand partners. And it's really to uncover the true experience of going through a rebrand. Rebrands are not easy. They often contain many challenges, and those challenges are nuanced. So the value of this series is to uncover those so that you have those experiences for yourself as you might enter a rebrand. Today, in this episode, I'm sitting down with Bob Moore. Now, who is Bob Moore? Bob Moore is a bit of a serial entrepreneur. He's on his third business now, has successfully sold first and second business. We worked with Bob twice now on rebranding efforts for his second and third business. Why not the first? Well, we didn't know Bob then. But at that point, Bob was also a non-believer in brand. And that's what makes this episode so interesting. You're going to be able to hear the story arc of Bob and his original thinking around brand and what that meant for his first business. And now subsequently his second business and it being sold, and now his third business and what it was like to work with us through that effort. Further, Bob is so influential and so impactful in this thinking that in writing our new book, Conquer Your Rebrand, which is all about the Focus Lab process and what you can expect working with us and what truly matters in conquering your rebrand, whether you work with us or not. I had Bob write the foreword. Yes, he wrote the foreword in the book. Not only did he write it, he crushed it. So we spent some time talking about that as well. This is another fantastic episode. So much value coming out of Bob and his experience. I really hope you enjoy. First off, can you just simply introduce yourself and tell everybody what you're building at Crossbeam?
Hey, everybody. My name is Bob Moore, co-founder and CEO over at Crossbeam. We're a SaaS platform, and you can think of our product as basically like an escrow service for data. So when you and a partner company are interested in figuring out things like how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or are my sales reps trying to sell to any of the same companies as your sales reps? Historically, that's an unsolvable problem because you have to share data that you otherwise wouldn't want to share. You can't draw that Venn diagram without sharing your entire customer list or other precious elements of your business. Where Crossbeam comes in is we sit in the middle as this secure, independent, third-party platform that basically does all the hard stuff. We ingest data from your CRM systems or other systems of record that know who those key relationships are with. We do the same with your partner, and then we create this secure, regulated environment in the middle where each side can turn these dials to indicate who can see what when and under what circumstances. And it creates this collaboration environment where you can work on accounts that you share, you can co-sell, you can co-market, you can develop products together, you can learn about your joint customer base and addressable market and customer profile, all without worrying about oversharing your data, breaking GDPR, having challenges related to collaborating. So we're really just trying to, bring partnerships into the fray with all of the, modern best in class workflows for how to build a great business.
No big deal. Really small operation.
Just some heavy duty nerd stuff as always. And speaking of nerd stuff, so prior to this, I built and sold two other SaaS companies. So one was called RJ Metrics. It was a data analytics platform. So think charts and dashboards, kind of looking at and understanding your data. We sold mostly to e-commerce companies there. We were acquired by Magento, which is now part of Adobe back in 2016. And then I was co-founder at Stitch Data, which was even nerdier than RJ Metrics. If RJ Metrics was charts and dashboards, Stitch was more like data pipelines and data infrastructure. So kind of how you move the data between various systems so you can analyze it in the right ways with the right tools. We sold that to Talend in 2018, which is when I started Crossbeam. So this is my third go around. Hopefully this is the biggest one yet, but lots of branding and rebranding scar tissue that has been developed along the way that I'm always happy to talk about.
Yeah, which is exactly why you're here. So thank you for that lead, which is a perfect then segue to what I was going to say following that, which is, here's a date for you, April 14th, 2016. That is when the Stitch Data project kicked off with Focus Lab.
That lined up so well. That year, I remember the year 2016, like on a day by day basis. I can tell you when various things happened.
So
So
April
yeah,
16,
yeah.
that's 7 years, 3 months, and 17 days ago, to be exact. That feels like a hell of a long time ago. I do still remember that project, Stitch Data, vividly,
Yep.
though. What a fantastic project. And the people that were on your team at that point and all that. Really enjoyed that project. So yeah, we've known you
Mhm.
for that long. And since then, like you've said, you went on, you sold that, you started Crossbeam right at the gate, out of the gate, I should say. You
Yep.
realized, let's do brand again. Let's make sure to do it early in Crossbeam. So we'll get into all of that in a minute. But even more specifically, I had the pleasure of working on this book, which I'll hold up so people can see if it will not focus on my eyes. So we just released this book about a month ago, Conquer Your Rebrand. And I was sitting down a year ago to write this book. And I was saying to myself, okay, we need to write a book about our process. We need to be fully transparent and just talk about what we do and why we do it. Nothing is secret sauce, but share what we know with the world, both peer and potential customer, and just share what we know in a very clear, transparent way. As I was going through writing that, I realized this is me just saying a lot of things. I need someone that has experienced this. Now I'm giving away the punchline. I need someone who has experienced this to write a forward in this book. So it's not just me talking on a pedestal on a soapbox. There's somebody saying, I was a non-believer. I've been through the process with this group specifically
Mhm.
twice now and giving your perspective. So you wrote the forward in the book. I can tell you my wife just read. She started to read the book this weekend while we're at the beach in Delaware. And she read the forward and she says she really doesn't like know the ins and outs of the business, right? She knows we do branding, but she read the forward and she said, wow, he really nailed that. And I said, I know, right? I almost didn't even need to write the book. Feel like you captured it so well. So I
Yeah.
would quickly just say out of the gate, I appreciate you for that. I appreciate the sentiment, the perspective that you shared. It is so valuable as a lead in this book. So thank you. Thank
Cool.
you. Thank you. Thank
Really
you.
my pleasure. I was humbled to be asked. And this is a subject that I find it fun to talk about it because you rewind the clock 15 years in my career and I was probably like your worst enemy, right? In
Yeah.
concept,
Yeah.
right? Like I had conviction about the reasons why the thing that you have built your career around are total BS.
Yeah.
And I think what's
Yeah.
happened is in the course of working through several of these companies and learning how to actually do this stuff in a way that works, I've kind of done a complete 180 on that point of view. And the evolution of doing that kind of this multi-year journey is what I try to capture in the forward. And,
Yeah.
it's a great way to kind of tee the ball up to you going into here's how this stuff is actually done right.
Well, you did it well. It was such a great, healthy, efficient perspective at the beginning of the book that really set the stage, of which I'm going to read a piece of that right
Cool.
now
Great.
because I think it is so powerful. And then maybe you can elaborate on it. So in the forward, you said, at the early stages of any company, you either make foundational investments in brand or you don't. By the time RJ Metrics grew to 100 employees, we hit an inflection point. There were more people than I could possibly know or influence on a personal level. Meanwhile, the stressors revealed more and more cracks in our identity system. We overlooked everything related to values, mission, storytelling, visuals, you name it, and had no idea how to share what we had in meaningful and inspiring ways. So let's talk about that for a second. In the beginning, like you just said, you're saying brand doesn't matter. We don't need to worry about that. We need to build a product. We need to focus on tools. Then your company got so big and you said, oh shit. Uh-oh.
Oh yeah. I rewinding the clock to those early days, I think we were always very big subscribers to the philosophy of the lean startup, right? Almost
Mhm.
to a, right? Like we went so far into being lean that we got into the territory of being cheap. And
Uh-huh.
it's a really important distinction there because, when you're lean, you make these extremely efficient, agile decisions to build, measure, and learn in this awesome loop. When you're cheap, you build the thing that costs the least, measure the thing that you wanted to measure in the first place, and learn to confirm your biases and go into this ultimate spiral, right? And I think what we did there during those early years was to great effect. we had a great idea at that company. And we were able to pretty efficiently, very inexpensively, in a totally bootstrapped way, iterate our way through that kind of slightly flawed build, measure, learn cycle to a version of product market fit, which did allow us to get to, 7 figures of revenue and dozens of employees and hundreds of customers, all profitably the whole way through. Like, never had a quarter where we didn't turn a profit. Like kind of from like a hustle culture, let's do this without venture money, like entrepreneur's dream point of view, that stuff worked. And it scaled really well as long as Jake, my co-founder, and I, between the two of us, we could kind of have our thumb on every single scale inside of the entire operation.
Yes.
And that personal touch, that founder-led touch that existed inside of every facet of the company, when we got to a point where we didn't just have managers, we had like managers of managers, and the telephone game of what is the why behind us doing this, not just any given project or any given win that we might be trying to do, but this in the biggest sense of the word. Like, why is this company here? Why did we start it? What do we stand for? Where are we going? In the early days, like that mission, vision, value stuff, I was such an opponent of that stuff. Like it felt like you walk into a big corporation and there's words on the walls like trust, honesty,
Collaboration.
collaboration. Yeah. And I would just like want to bang my head up against that wall, right? Because it's like values at their core just felt to me like some kind of, the antithesis of the lean startup. Some really expensive people spent time in a room for weeks and weeks and weeks to come up with these words that you could have thrown a dart in like the thesaurus for good, right? And they come together in. And because of that, I rejected them in their entirety, right? We just didn't do it. We didn't have a mission, a vision, or values at Arching Metrics as a company until later on. And it was when we got up to that larger scale when we started kind of realizing that there is actually a place for the mission and the vision and the values. And the idea is not to, just be kind of these feel good words that are on the wall. We really put our stake in the ground around the idea that, well, a value system is meant to be like an argument ender, right? Like your ability to invoke a value in a conversation ought to be something that just like, stops a 3-hour conversation from happening, because if something flies in the face of one of these North Stars, then it's just fundamentally not something we're going to do at the company. And the brand turns out to be almost existentially entangled in the mission and the vision and the values that exist inside of a company. And when you're under investing in that mission, vision, and values, you're almost definitionally under investing in the brand. Like those two come like part and parcel. And that like, look, RJ Metrics was the definition of the company that like spends $50 on 99 designs and just go. Yeah, it's like you look at our old logos. I forget if there's like pictures of them in the forward or not, but you can find. I've written blog posts about this stuff. Like our old logos, they're just hilariously bad, and there are some great stories about some of the things that went sideways with our logos. Maybe you can ask a follow up on that if you're curious later. But the net of it was, it's not just that we didn't stand out. It's not just that we weren't a memorable brand to our customers. It's that our own team didn't identify with the identity of the business.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that like when we solved our brand identity issue, that process could have never happened had we not solved for like our company identity issue.
Yeah.
And in the after moments of having done that, and really the Stitch project ended up being kind of the core of that, because RJ Metrics, we sold the business, but Stitch was a spin out. So in a weird way, Stitch kind of felt like a pivot from RJ Metrics, even though we had an exit there. So it really was, while it felt like a fresh company, it ultimately was a giant rebrand of everything that we had done and built because it was a lot of the same people and a lot of the same technology and everything else. It was our moment to just like have a clean slate and do it right, even though we had all this baggage from the old thing coming along with it. And holy moly, was it better in the universe of Stitch in all these various ways. And maybe I'll just wrap with that thought, Ray, which is that there's kind of like the before times and the after times in terms of my own philosophy around this stuff. And that April 2016 date that you mentioned is literally like the inflection point date, right? When I stepped from one side into the other. Or I should say that Kevin Jackson and our product team there dragged me kicking and screaming.
I was just going to ask that. That is going to be my follow-up question since you led us there. I think that's a great perspective to share, which was you're fully transitioned now, if you will. But at that point, your team was saying, hey, we gotta start this new venture on the right foot. And it sounds like you were still kind of like, oh, but I trust you.
Yeah. What I trusted was our customer base and what we were hearing from the market.
Okay.
And I think in addition to, I talk about the brand identity mattering from a team structure and a values perspective internally, but it's also important to note that externally, by the time we got to the time that we sold RJ Metrics, I think our lack of that clear, kind of who are we and what are we actually doing here, North Star, also caused some real cracks to show in our product itself. The closest thing that we had to a vision at RJ Metrics was like a mantra that we often said, which is data-driven decisions are better decisions.
Okay.
And we would use that right internally to make sure that we were being very, very data-driven in various ways. But if you think about that and you try to apply it as like a product vision, you could literally build anything in the entire realm, the history of like data software and technology and data analytics and data infrastructure or whatever, and be true to that, right? It's too broad. It's too much. And in fact, after, you might even be able to fight after Magento acquired us and then Adobe acquired Magento. There are still websites out there. If you use the Adobe Commerce Cloud Business Intelligence Suite, that is RJ Metrics, right? The RJ Metrics product lives on as part of like an Adobe product within an Adobe piece. And if you go to the website for it, I think the tagline for a long time was like, all of your data, comma, everywhere, or something like that. Like so incredibly, incredibly broad, like not a value proposition. It's just like literally like the kitchen sink of data.
It's like
here you
just
go.
a statement.
And, it's like, if you try to be everything, you're nothing. Right. And I think what ended up happening is that we as a product ended up spreading ourselves incredibly thin. That product did so much for so many different user personas who needed so many different things across so many different verticals that it was never the best in class tool for the job. And it put some limits on, how high our contract values could go, what people were willing to pay, how many people inside of an organization could really become power users and like really, really understand the platform. I'm saying this to answer your question about my team dragging me kicking and screaming over the line to say that I actually knew at the time that we were pivoting over from RJ into Stitch that the very nature of what we were doing was to condense this giant thing that was RJ down into just this one really specific focused thing that RJ did really well, which is stitch data together between data sources. Like make a connectivity. That was the data pipelining thing, right? That was at the core of that Stitch brand. So we, even before the kicking and screaming part, even before the brand part, there was a product vision part, which was we screwed this up by not knowing who we really were and by allowing us to kind of be capable of thinking that every idea is a good idea from a product standpoint and getting too thin. We are narrowing the scope on that. And it is an opportunity for us then to actually have a brand that doesn't say all your data everywhere, but that says that this very specific thing is something that we are world-class, like the best in the world at, and you're not going to find it better anywhere else. And that was that moment where KJ, who ran our design team at the time, kind of introduced the concept of, hey, let's work with some folks who are ridiculously good at that stuff because we don't really have the experience or firepower in-house. And that's, first time I met you.
That project was kick ass.
I love that. And I would say that brand persists to this day, right? We sold that company almost 5 years ago now to Talend. And not only has Talend kept the branding Stitch, like the name Stitch, the website Stitch, but the logo and all of that work has been pulled in under the Talend.
Love that.
Not even as Talend has, they were a public company when they acquired us. They got taken private by private equity and then they got acquired by Click. And all of that has kind of happened. And just about everything has changed about that business except the thing, which is the one like, it's the thing that won't die because it's just so undeniably good in so many ways. Yeah.
A lot of fond memories of that project.
Mm-hmm.
There's another note in your forward I want to read almost more just because I love it and I think it's funny and we don't have to elaborate on it, but I will ask you a question. So you said a lot of tech-minded folks, that will make sense now, having heard all the things you talked about, which is the roots of all of your companies to this point, i.e. stubborn engineers, probably resonated with your note about basically what you said is brand identity felt like at best a huge waste of time. They, so like culturally, why do you think that is? Why are there groups of people that feel like that is a waste of time?
There's a thing that you get drilled into your head when you go to college to be an engineer or whatever. You take YouTube courses to be an engineer, right? When you study the discipline of software engineering, and it has to do with efficiency.
Uh,
And it tends to be something that shows up in the way that code is constructed. This is also maybe like I'm dating myself here, right? Which is like when I got my engineering degree, I learned everything in C, the programming language C. I went to Princeton. I learned it from Brian Kernighan, who was the original kind of like godfather of the C language, and was able to give a lot of really amazing perspectives on how that language is used. And eventually, our school switched over to teaching Java, but Java is just built on top of C, right? A lot of the same principles apply, but a lot of the core ideas there, back when these languages were first invented, is that memory is a really scarce resource, right? So literally the amount of characters that you use to write the code, and the way in C you have these memory allocation functions where you're physically saying, I'm going to have a variable here. I need you to assign, 6 bits to it so it can store information. And a language and the compiler are not doing that work for you. You can actually, manually prescribe how much space should be used. And a lot of what you get really good at is this like jujitsu of being able to piece together extremely terse and efficient expressions of what needs to be done, trying to balance that with a way that you make it readable, but ultimately you do backflips for years and years to get really good at this stuff. And then that starts to have this very interesting psychological effect of like invading its way into the way that your rest of your life is run. Because of that, there is a lot of natural skepticism that goes into like what I would describe almost as like meeting culture, which shows up in a lot of big companies. But you can look at this as recently as a few weeks ago, like Shopify did this really incredible thing that grabbed headlines where they canceled every single meeting in the entire company and
Yep.
made people recreate them if they really needed to have them. And they introduced this little widget inside of their Google Calendar, which took the average salary for each of the titles of the people that were in the meeting and calculated on an hourly basis how much this meeting was going to cost the business, right?
Yeah.
So in the course of recreating, you had to be like, is this meeting worth $4,000? In order to have these people's time spent on it. And that talk about an engineering-led culture, right? Like I think that goes all the way back to Toby, their CEO, right? Like, but it's that same thing. It's like, so my job ultimately as CEO, I can distill it in a number of ways, but maybe the most like brash capitalist way to distill it down is that I am a capital allocator. I am an allocator of capital, and that's human capital. It's intellectual capital. It's ultimately financial capital. So what's going on in that Shopify meeting thing? It is the same as writing a function in C and needing to decide whether or not it's worth allocating this many bits of memory. Well,
Yeah.
Shopify is deciding whether or not to allocate this many of our financial resources and our human resources to this meeting. It's anti-meeting. So here's the answer to your question. When I think about brand identity, I think of a bunch of effing meetings is what I picture. I
About
picture
feelings and thoughts.
about feelings, right? Like a whole lot of the most expensive people at your entire company sitting around a table, looking at like a poster board that someone else probably spent, 6 hours putting together the night before, trying to decide whether or not your company is a Ford Model T or a Ferrari or a Tesla. And it even, in describing it now, I'm even agreeing with myself a little bit. There is something intrinsically in like my core training that feels fundamentally broken about allocating capital in that way to create an output that ultimately is kind of like a touchy feely intangible where the
Yes.
ROI story is not so concrete and direct. I think the closer a company's culture is to being engineer founded or engineering led, the higher proclivity they'll have to falling into that fallacy.
Well said. And it makes me believe that even without an engineering background, even a founder, a business owner is going to lean that way.
I
Just
think
for the reasons you stated, right? Which is allocation, capital allocation, time, priorities, resources on things that can be seen as nebulous until they're not seen
Yeah.
as nebulous anymore.
And that's look, I mentioned that phrase scar tissue earlier, right? And I think this is also a great example of like any executive or founder, whether it's at their company or when they worked at another company that's been through a round of layoffs, that's had to shut a project down, that's had something not work and had there be like very emotionally taxing consequences for something having been poorly run or not working. Like that's another way that that same mentality gets kind of drilled into you. It's like, we don't have time for the luxury of like playing business here. And like going
Ah,
through the motions of stuff that feels like it's the act of doing business as opposed to like actually doing the thing. Like, are we building something incredible that customers value and will pay money for and that we can deliver with positive margins? And are we working towards something that's going to help us enable that? And I think the kind of God mode zoom out thing that happened over the course of my career is just realizing what a superpower and what a force multiplier things like brand can be in service of
yeah.
that,
Hmm.
applied as like an elevator to the entire system. Whereas if you try to pinpoint like the specific tactical outputs of that individual meeting from an ROI calculation basis, you're never gonna decide how to do it, right?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. Very, very well said. All right. Let's zoom in a little bit and try to remember what it felt like. Let's talk about feelings. Hey,
Yeah.
uh, for you as a founder to go through a project, and then we'll come kind of back to the book in a minute. So, as a founder now, having gone through both the Stitch data and the Crossbeam project, what for you is the most challenging? Can you share some of those points
Hmm.
outside of the mental conflict of is this worth it? I mean the actual
Yeah.
exercise of going through it.
Yeah, I think it's related to some of the predispositions that I have from the engineering background and everything. But there comes a point in these things where you have what appear to be a a set of really good options in front of you, and you have to make a decision on those options based on things that are impossible to quantify, and that leads my brain down the road of saying like, all right, here's what we're going to do. Let's buy a bunch of LinkedIn ads and put the three different versions in the LinkedIn ads. And then we'll spend a couple $100 and we'll collect enough, to see what the click through rates are higher. So we can optimize on like, what's going to drive people to act. But like, even doing that, it's an attempt to quantify which of these is objectively better than the other one, but it's using some kind of false proxy for good, which is like, does it cause people when they look at LinkedIn to click a button? I'm not sure that that's the thing that we want our company to be the best at. Like, we want the people like, oh, click, being the impulse, right? Like maybe it's, ooh, radically transform my business, which usually a click is not, the first step in that, right? So I struggled so much with looking at these and being asked the question, which one of these do you like more? Because I intrinsically am like, who cares what I like more?
Yes.
Like what,
Yes.
what's going to create the best outcome is what I care the most about.
Right.
And
Still
by the
not
way,
knowing that answer at that point,
it's not
right?
knowing that answer and being able to have some kind of like spidey sense about which of these things is actually the best and works the best. And I think this is again a lesson in like, I've talked to my CEO coach occasionally about this, right? Learning these lessons and there being some real virtue in uh, allowing your combination of muscle memory and scar tissue to actually give you intuition as a
Mm.
founder and as an executive. And intuition is something that maybe sits in that bucket of these like, soft and squishy, hard to quantify things. But more and more as I've gone through these experiences in my career, more often than not, it's turned out that my intuition has actually probably been a far better ally for me than the data driven decisions are better decisions mantra.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it took a decade plus of like, getting beat up out there in the market and having, the roller coaster of good and bad things happen to feel confidence in that intuition being informed by something. I think that's just part of the maturity model in, being a more seasoned operator is that you start to understand your intuition and where it's good and where it's bad. And the reality is by the time we got to Crossbeam, which was also a project that your team led, which is like literally I spent an hour
Yep.
talking about how awesome Crossbeam is. I even have like with the Crossbeam, Pam, our Crossbeam mascot,
Yes.
every employee that has a baby gets one of those. By the time we got to that, those questions that were so hard, this like, do you like A better or B better? Those questions weren't hard anymore. And I think it took going through the Stitch thing, having a bit of support from my team members who I think had a better conviction in their intuition than I did, and having them kind of coach me through it. But ultimately going with my intuition and having it work so damn well with that Stitch brand, and having that branding be so successful, that I think it was kind of a really important stepping stone in my own growth. And it applies to a lot more than just that kind of, brand decisions, but what a great tentpole those are. For testing.
You are adding so much value to this conversation. I just want to stop and say that this is 100% going to be a must watch. That's no disrespect to anybody that's ever been on the show. There's a lot of value. I just specifically love your analytical brain and how it is processing brand topics. It's a really interesting dynamic in contrast to a technical mind like yours in a warm and fuzzy world of brand, and how those two things don't have to be at odds with each other. And they're just so dynamically different and very interesting in how you're processing and answering these questions. I love this. I love this. Thank you.
Awesome.
Next question. What was the most rewarding aspect of the rebrand work for you, again, through the founder lens?
Just from a pure like dopamine perspective, honestly, it was hearing positive feedback about our brand completely unsolicited. And I think that we've gone through like rebrandings, new logo stuff, whatever, but you ever get that feeling like you're at a party and you decide to wear like a really unusual pair of shoes or something, and like everybody who walks by is like, hey, nice shoes. And you're wondering like, are they nice shoes, or are they just so they're like catching your attention, and the person caught themselves looking at it, and like it could be a total train wreck, but they're like, I'm just going to acknowledge the fact that these weird shoes exist. Hey, nice shoes. And I think there's a difference between hey, I saw you rolled out a new logo from 99 Designs, RJ Metrics. Way to go. Cool new logo. I like your logo. Like we've gotten those kind of pat on the back, like attaboy style, compliments in the past about logos that we put a lot less work into. But when the Stitch stuff launched, like designers would like pull me over at a conference and want to talk about the logo for 20 minutes, right? The t-shirts that we made, I can't tell you how many RJ Metrics t-shirts we made over the years, probably like, easily 30 of them. I have like a bin back in my keepsake box of all the different like funny like Carpe Data, right? And like the love statue from Philly, but it says data, like all with a little like logo in the corner. You know how many t-shirts we made at Stitch? One. You know what was on that t-shirt? The logo. And
hell yes.
People wore that shirt. I mean, that shirt, I have I wish I had 100 of them. I should actually go ask if somebody's got a stockpile somewhere, or if we could do like a special print, because this just like kind of, like charcoal black with just the brand itself, like squarely in the center. It looked like you could wear that to a concert. You could wear that to a business meeting. And we did, and like seeing people that we didn't know on the street wearing the t-shirt for our company just because it was badass. That's the dopamine rush. All right. And I think I didn't realize that was a possible thing, or a thing that people could rally around in that way, because I had all these false positives from the RJ Metrics business, where we kind of got like the, tepid high five about the logo rebrand. And I'm like, oh, people like the logo, right? But look, people tell you what you want to hear, especially when you're the founder of a company and you got a lot of emotion wrapped up in it. And it's not until you see what good really, really, really looks like that you realize what was, kind of not as real.
I can actually vividly remember that shirt as well. I hear you as a founder, and even to come back to the book for a minute, when this book released a month ago, the thing I was waiting for was the person that I didn't know to write a review and hear what they actually think. Not somebody on my team, not someone like yourself who's had a part of the book and worked with us, a true outsider to read the thing, and did it hit in the way that I wanted it to hit. And as soon as I got the first one out of the way, I'm like, I don't know that person. Oh my God. A+. They said the things I would have hoped they would have said. And There was no prescription for me. I did not guide that. Then I
Mm.
felt like the book is live and I have passed the first big test that I was hoping to pass. So I feel you from that founder's dopamine hit
Dude,
is real.
congratulations on that, by the way, because I think we've all been through the opposite version of that, which is, you run. Well, it's all this relates to, like, again, vulnerability and a willingness to, when you do something like trust your intuition to govern these decisions, you are going to be wrong sometimes, and like
Yes.
allowing yourself the grace to, like, be wrong and to have it go sideways and absorb that feedback and accumulate that scar tissue or that muscle memory or whatever it is, and make the intuition better next time. It's like a big part of that process. And that's like, you can never have that positive experience unless you put yourself out there for the risk that you might get a book review
Correct.
that says, this thing's a big hunk of junk.
Yeah.
Which thing
And
it's not.
come, right? Like there at some point,
Yeah.
there has to be the straight up 1 star.
There's
Guys,
going to be, man,
guys
it's
full of
guaranteed.
self, and there's no value here, right? Like that's totally fine.
It's physically impossible to earn 5 stars on anything in life unless there is another human out there that will give you 1 star for the same exact reason.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
I mean, like the version of success, do you want it to be because you've got a 3-star rating because everybody on the planet is kind of like, yeah, that's nice. Or is it because you want to have people give you 5 and have people give you 1? I can tell you from a
Right.
business perspective, I take the latter all day long, because those 5-star people, that's more than enough market share to build an incredible,
Correct.
enduring business.
Correct.
But
Yep.
those 3-star people are going to give you, barely the time of day, and have no loyalty, right? So,
Yeah.
the way it goes.
People should absorb that. Even if, we would never suggest that brands or logos, but those are the most front facing aspects of a relaunch when it hits publicly. And there's always people on that front. They're going to be, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I hate this thing. But again, that doesn't matter. To your point earlier, it almost doesn't even matter at all if you even like it, Bob. What matters is if it works and accomplishes the goal.
Yeah. Very, very true. I think that's a great philosophy to live your life by. There's countless things you can kind of point to inside and outside of the professional world that's true for.
I'm going to talk about ROI real quick. I know we're getting closer on time, and I'll try to keep us efficient here, but there's another passage you wrote in the book, which is great. I'm going to read that as well. So from the forward, again, this idea of ROI. So you said, here's something else I discovered over time. We weren't really being lean by underinvesting in brand. We were being cheap. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And it cost us in the long run. By the time we tried to solve for a weak brand, value system, and identity, we were already playing catch up and never truly caught up. Now, here's where the punch comes. It's human nature to remember when you've been burned. As time goes by, you stay sensitive to repeating the same mistakes. The pain that my co-founder and I felt around RJ Metrics is easy to access. We spent 8 years building that company. When we sold, we were happy enough with the figure. Then 2 years later, our top competitor sold for about 100 times the amount we settled on. You read that, right?
Yeah.
We missed the $1 billion version of our opportunity. When something like that happens, you don't ever stop wondering why. And then you go on to imply that brand would have played a part in that, right? It's not the only ingredient in a giant sale acquisition, but it can play an important part. So I just wanted to read that. I thought that was so well said and pretty impactful in the forward.
Yeah, it's and a totally true story too. Looker was the company that we competed with that, basically heavily disrupted our space after they were founded after we were, right? And they ended up getting acquired by Google for many, many, many billions of dollars, effectively with like a really comparable value proposition at their core to what we had built. But I think the way that branding plays into that. Sure. First of all, like, I think companies with great brands do actually fetch a valuation premium when getting acquired. It's usually not like a billions of dollars premium, but it's a little sprinkles on the cupcake there for sure. Something to juice the number. But what I'd say though is that, like, the lack of our investment in brand was emblematic of just the lack of investment in identity. And that stretched all the way to product identity, which stretched all the way to what we mean to our customers, which stretched into what they'll pay for the platform, how loyal they are to it, how much those accounts grow over time. And these are where you start getting into some of like the unit economics of what makes an absolutely outstanding business. And Looker was an absolutely outstanding business. I mean, that company knew how to, they made a very specific thing for a very specific persona. They spoke to that persona. They knew who they were, and they landed at high contract values, and they expanded the heck out of those contracts over time and became dominant really rapidly in the space. And, they, some really, really experienced founders there who knew precisely what they were doing that frankly, we learned a lot of positive lessons from at Stitch, because when we started Stitch, our number one partner when we launched the business was Looker.
Wow.
Whereas we competed with Looker at RJ Metrics, at Stitch,
Yeah.
it was actually an extremely complementary technology, because it's like we moved data from A to B, they were the B, and
Wow.
like their platform could kind of sit on top of these data warehouses we push data into and deliver insights. So we ended up kind of getting really cozy with Looker over the course of building Stitch and learning so much from that team. And huge shout outs to everybody involved there. They all had a great run.
I really love how you broke down in a very clear way how investment in brand actually does find itself through the whole system. I think that's where the gap starts to show itself. Someone says, "Oh, what's a new color palette going to do for me? What's a new logo going to do for me? What does it matter if I have clear values and my team feels like they're a part of a thing that they want to be a part of?" You just in that last passage went through where that actually shows up very tactically and financially. I think that's one of the hardest things for people to understand. And quite honestly, it can become very hard for us to express. I do my best in the book to express that. You just did it in like a 45-second answer really well. So thank you. Yeah, I think you've answered this probably 30 times over in the interview, but I'm going to ask it again and maybe you're going to come up with a different answer.
Yeah.
If you were sitting down with another founder and they were still struggling to understand why investing in brand matters, and you had to just hit them with like your one point that would get them over the edge, I'm curious from your perspective what that would be.
I'm a big fan of TV show Succession. And there's a scene toward the end of the series, no spoilers, where Logan Roy, who's kind of the patriarch of this big family business, is sitting there with his kids who are all kinds of screw ups in their own ways. And he says, "Children, I love you, but you are not serious people." And I think that for the universe of folks that I think have kind of been through the exercise of bringing a company to escape velocity, or at least being around people who have, and being able to, kind of interpolate the whys behind those things happening when they do. I think when someone is underinvesting in brand, the perception is that they are not a serious person. There's a desire to do right, and there is a clear picture on where you want to get to. But the pieces of the puzzle that are necessary for getting you there are not fully understood. And I think that's actually what Logan's getting at, right? When he says his kids aren't serious people, it's not that they don't have ambition. It's not that they don't know what success looks like and what the kind of material outcomes of being successful are. It's that they haven't actually been through the ringer enough to deserve kind of the gravitas that they afford themselves, right?
Mhm.
And that there's some kind of weird hubris connected to that, and that it's very, very dangerous, right, to put a large amount of power or influence in the hands of people that's true for. So I guess it's almost like I'm mixing my pop culture references here, but to me, the ability and the wherewithal to make these investments in brand and company identity are almost like when Van Halen used to have in their writer that there should be no brown M&Ms in the M&M bowl backstage, right? People talk about that like it's a joke, like it's not Van Halen's ridiculous, right? They just have an insane writer, but they did it for a real specific reason. The reason they did that is when they showed up, they looked at the bowl of M&Ms and their crew could tell if there were no brown M&Ms in that bowl, they didn't have to double check that the lighting rig had been set up in the exact right place and that the right gauge of wire had been used for, the sound system, and that the lighting timing was going to be programmed correctly. They knew that by the time the folks at the venue got down in the writer to the M&Ms part, if they got that right, this place was a tightly run ship and they knew what they were doing, and they were professionals. They were serious people. branding and design is the brown M&M of building a real serious, durable, scalable company. And I think anybody that's kind of been through it a few times would absolutely be forced to agree.
When would you like to come work at Focus Lab? Bob?
Professional podcast interviewee. Yeah,
Wow.
that'll be my retirement job, hopefully.
Even I didn't know what I was getting involved in here today. Fantastic, sir. Just so everybody knows, I didn't send any of these questions to Bob. Zero. He had no preparation for this. He had no idea what I was going to ask him. I just threw a bunch of stuff at him. Casual conversation. You have proved your power today, sir. Thank you so much for sharing that expertise, that perspective. The goal of these interviews, like the book, is to simply share knowledge so that others can succeed in brand. It's a very unselfish projection of what we know to be true, what our clients experience, and then can share out. You shared a ton of value today, and I know people will be better for it. So if that's part of your personal mission, you have succeeded today. Thank you.
Awesome.
Sir.
Thank you, Bill. It's really a blast to dig in with you and geek out on this stuff. And so incredibly proud of this book, and again, humbled to be included in the forward. So yeah, we'll keep spreading the good word out there, and I'll continue. I probably wear stuff your team has designed on my person more often than any other possible brand of clothing. So thank you for that. A huge part of my life in many ways.
We're your favorite fashion designer. I understand.
That's right.
Proud to be that. Proud to be that. Thanks a ton, sir. Awesome.
Cool. Thank you, Bill.